The Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship Program represents a rewarding academic professional development opportunity for faculty at Montgomery College. The fellowships are a product of a unique collaboration between Montgomery College and the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. It's the first of its kind between the Smithsonian Institution and a community college.
Dr. Anastine Theophile Lafond is a Caribbean scholar with extensive teaching experience. In the field of communication, she maintains pedagogy rooted in demystifying the communication process. Anastine is a Fulbright scholar and an award-winning journalist. She is experienced in teaching courses in communication theory, research methods, and interpersonal and intercultural communication, as well as public relations and public speaking. Anastine engages in research for applied communications and ICT for development in the Caribbean. She is a graduate of the 19th cohort of Montgomery College Leadership Institute.
When they ask me, what do you do for a living, I say I'm a teacher. And that's all I go by. And so I teach in the Communication Studies unit, and I teach mainly Introduction to Human Communication, understanding self, understanding the other. And so how did we tackle the theme? I teach a number of sessions in Intro to Human Communication, and I wanted to find out what kind of, in the old language of research, subjects that I was dealing with, but I call them respondents and participants because they were my students. And we had to come to an agreement to achieve a goal collectively. And what did I find out? That I had almost more than 2/3 full-time, some part-time, but very, very bilingual, global in their ethnic origin, and they self-identified as dreamers, anchor babies, first-time generation immigrants. And so the whole museum experience is being centered around that kind of context. First, the human. I had to link what my goal was to my students' goals. And so I had to look at my own syllabi and look at my course, my learning outcomes and the program outcomes, and extracted that which was important for the course to achieve my goal and my students' goals. And so I had to dwell on some competencies for information literacy, written communication, and critical thinking. And in terms of proficiency, mindfulness, a key concept in the first 3 chapters of the text, and social responsibility. So there were 3 assignments that guided the work that we did last year. And the first was the self-concept paper. Really, this project did not stretch me too much out of my zone because that's communication. That's what it does to you. And so to understand the immigrant experience, one would first have to understand oneself. And so the assignment on self-concept played into that wonderfully. And that self-concept paper, a student were to use the idea, use the content that they gathered, and begin to dwell on themselves and think about who they are. And in the process, think about what's the current context, the social context of society at the time was doing to them. And so you had to write this 3 to 5 page paper. Students were given a rubric, what should be in your paper, what you need to give to get 5 points out of 5, and 4 points out of 4, and 3.5. And I told my students I wasn't going to dwell on anything below 3.5 because my expectation for you was that high. So I was really setting them up. And so they had to think about who they were, but significantly how they identified in this context, whether they were American or not, and how did they feel about the current debate on immigration. And this is kind of wordle that I learned. And look at the kinds of thoughts that came out, and these were the dominant ones. I feel angry. I had students who were feeling confused. These are the people who had to carry 12 or 15 credits and do well in the semester and have this burden on their back psychologically. I wish you could have been in my class, Catherine, maybe you'd have helped me. Like they had this dual consciousness, the struggle, conflicting emotions, and some maybe not even sleeping at night. So these were the key terms that came out of their reflection on by just writing the essay. Now, in terms of their reflection on the assignment, it caused them to grow a little more in intercultural empathy. It caused them to be sympathetic to the situation that was being played out in public at the time. And interestingly, for many of them, trying to figure out who I am and to deal with the immigration issue was the hardest thing I ever had to do. And so it sort of set up my situation on how I was going to have to deal with my students to find a way to maybe ease some of the pain, even as I achieved the objectives in my course. And the second assignment was one of the key concepts, maybe the only factor that was remained in my proposal in its original form. And very early on in the modules, we taught on self-perception and the self in communication. One of the factors we embrace is the whole idea of impression formation and impression management. The things we have to do to make ourselves fit into our environment, either we are going to dress with some kind of artifact on the outside, or we change, we self-monitor, or we adjust our behavior. And so I wanted to be able to assess again their level of mindfulness and empathy. I wanted them to think critically, and I also wanted intentional reflection on that issue of social importance. And so the assignment was this: you were to interview an immigrant outside of the class. So you had to go back into your community. And for some people, they got to know their neighbors. I was kind of happy about that. So you were given a question, a guide that dealt with issues of culture. When you talk about culture, you talk about values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. Perceptions, the perceptions that the immigrant had before they got to America, and how the perception changed when they got there. And then the things they had to do to fit in once they got into these United States. And that is where the excitement was in the whole class. What did you have to do to fit in? So for many people, and the data is rich, that they, in the house, they were in a different country, a different continent, because what adorned the walls, the artifacts, were ethnic in origin, the music, the language, the behavior. And then when they stepped out of the house, they had to put on another self. And this was very, very, very sharp. Interestingly, out of this interview, and for that interview, a student could not give me the reported speech. So you framed your questions, and then you had the rich data, the actual quotations from your interviewee. And out of that, now you sat and you wrote a 2-paragraph reflection on what you learned about impression formation from your interviewees, and then how did that make you feel? So this is a template of the questions, and they would put their responses on the side, and then the 2-paragraph reflection would follow. What did they say about the assignment that they did? It changed their perception about immigration. They had sympathy for people who had the similar experiences. It strengthened their perception of immigrants, and they were able to put themselves in the shoe of the other. So they walked away with some kind of change of attitude out of this. So those 2 assignments now set us up quite nicely to go into beginning to look way further than just what is very close to me. And so it took us to the 3rd assignment, the object-based learning. And my goal there was to allow my students to think critically about what they did, to build on their information literacy, to use technology, and also their level of mindfulness. And before they stepped out of the Montgomery College campus, we had learning to look, a particular assignment, or class exercise where we took some of the artifacts from online. We did our analysis, looking at it before, now, and after. What are the things you look for when you go to the museum? What can you deduce? What can you imply? And set them out psychologically, so when they got to the museum, their attitude would already have changed in terms of how do I approach a museum visit. And you had to visit the National Museum of American History. You had to tour the Julia Child's Kitchen artifacts, and then answer 10 questions. Why did I, as a teacher, select food? coming out of all the pain that I saw was being experienced among my student population, I had to find something where I could meet my objective, something that could transcend culture and also be some kind of healing balm. So I went to the kitchen. Maybe that's why I cook. And students were given the 10 questions that they had to answer. They were free to select the mode of presentation. So they were going to give me either a PowerPoint, many of them chose that, with lots of pictures and their comments. Some gave me a Word file, some gave me a video, and I had to figure it out, but then I left it open, so therefore I had to deal with it and grade it as a teacher. And we followed all the rules and got to the museum. It was a family experience for some people. They went with their boyfriend, their mother, who had a wonderful father-son moment, a wonderful mother-daughter moment, but they went. And in total, I had more than 60-something students going to the museum. So when you went to the museum, I wanted to assess my job as a teacher on the left and how you were going to get that done for me on the right. So critical thinking, compare your cooking culture to that of Julia Childs, the American. And they found out that this was the woman who maybe single-handedly and strangely at a time when women were not at the forefront was given leeway in the television programs to bridge cultures through food. And so you begin to think critically when you begin to compare your situation with another. Making connections, what linkages can you make between your family's culture and the American culture? And if by chance you will think, well, you don't have another, any of those that you might have experienced even while you lived in these United States. And further again, making connections, identify one artifact and explain how your selected artifact influences the presence of certain foods in your culture. And it was amazing the kind of relationships that they found existed, and some were surprised that, wow, it's just like mine, you know? So they were able to make that connection. And then the reflection, write a probing account about your complete museum experience in 1 to 2 paragraphs. And importantly for me, while I test their information literacy, was that you had to cite at least 3 interesting facts about the Julia Childs kitchen, but you had to cite your sources. And you were free to do it MLA or APA. And the bottom line was that, could you do that? Because I challenged them, I say, well, they told me when you got into my class, you were able to do that. So let me see, okay? So that was our museum experience. And they had things to say. That's Walker talking here, and I can't even tell you what else. Walker told me, hey, Dr. Laffer, that was dope, and I had to, it's a lucky thing I could translate the language. And guys, I'm from the Caribbean and I know about dope, so, you know. And Gabriella was disappointed that she couldn't touch the artifacts. They were behind the glass, and I learned something. And she said, I was shocked to learn that so many of the artifacts were also used in my culture, build a relationship. Amina liked the fact that she could go out, and many of them expressed that, like some of my other colleagues have done, that we're not confined in the classroom. I could touch, I could see, I could talk, and I could learn, okay? People did something else after they went to one museum experience. Some of my students went to watch a whole set of museums for the entire day. They brought their family back. They went back on, some went 3 times. And so once you get their feet wet, you realize that they will continue to do this. And some made the higher level connection, looking at food and the common ground that we have. And it felt so different and happy. It was the first time. Can you imagine? Can you feel the joy? Like the first time going there. So that was our museum experience. I have Moses number 2 because I happen to have 2 students with the same name, so I had to label them 1 and 2. We came to an agreement. And checking the different displays, something we don't do too often. Unique, they enjoyed the format because they were not told exactly how to present, so they were able to be free in the presenting of their information. And then I have a philosopher here, you know, about the food and culture, lots to think about, and how to evaluate and pay attention to. And she said, well, it used to be a melting pot, but now it's a salad bowl, you know, so. Okay. This is my best takeaway, because that person summarized all the discussions we had in class especially because she did not want to go to the museum. Okay? But when you can say to me that you could not find any other exhibit that could potentially meet the goal of this assignment, it means that you understood something happened to you, okay? To explore cross-cultural influences with a historical perspective and to force what? I wanted you to think about what you were experiencing and what you were learning. So when you think about impression formation, when you think of self-identity, you begin to be able to go a little deeper into the whole idea of the immigrant, myself, the other. What did I take away as a teacher? Number one, I learned that my students are brilliant and our students are smart. We have to just make the right connection. So hence my puzzles on the left. Number two, object-based learning gives students a voice, all students a voice, because everyone was able to learn the concepts that I wanted to have taught, enjoy themselves in the process, and be quite happy to come to class and talk about it. And for me as a teacher, it taught me the importance of being transparent. One, before you got into my class that semester, I sent you an email. I told you exactly what was going to happen in class, why you could bail out now before you finally sign up, and also where to find the information. Every assignment was loaded on my page on the school's website, so you could go back there to refer it. And every time I had to keep my promise. What was the big question we're going to look for? What are the objectives that the syllabi said I was going to have to teach you? And what are the things we're going to actually do in the class to make sure that we're keeping our promise on that line? And so my experience. 2015, Smithsonian Fellowship.